Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever, wherever, and however you're listening. We appreciate that you are. It's not football season officially, but for Marty and I, it is always football season, at least always Delaware High School football season. Marty, how you doing?
Doing great, enjoying the spring, and I can't wait to get back into football. I was excited that we decided to do this preseason podcast, so looking forward to it.
And the most exciting thing that's happened in your life is you've become a grandfather again, another
Holy smokes!
grandchild.
Yeah, I went from 0 to 3 in no time here. So yeah, Grandpa's tired most days, but
That's
it's
right.
been awesome. I love it. I love it.
That's why we record on Sunday mornings. It's the only time Marty's
That's
not
right.
watching one of his three grandchildren. So anyway, we hope you've had a great winter. Lots to talk about in general for Delaware High School sports, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on that kind of stuff because you're here to listen to Delaware High School football stuff. We're the only media outlet that focuses specifically on Delaware High School football. A lot of other people do a lot of great coverage stuff, but they also do other sports, and that's nothing wrong with that. But that's kind of how we've found our niche, is that our podcast is strictly about Delaware High School football, and that's all we do. We got some exciting news. We're going to bring on some new sponsors next year. Also have a returning sponsor, Mary Kate Johnston of Remax Associates. And so excited that she's back. The Marticelli Group. And you may not have heard of the term Marticelli Group, but you certainly heard of the Chesapeake Inn, Klondike Kate's, and La Casa Pasta. They own all three of those restaurants. They're donating gift cards to us so that we can, and we're going to come up with a way that we're going to give those out. And we're not sure what that's going to be. But each week we'll be giving a $50 gift card out to one of those three restaurants. Or it might be one where you can use it for all three. We're not 100% sure of that, but we're excited about that. And we thank them for their support of us. Indirectly supporting Delaware High School football is what they're doing. And then Diamond Hill Incorporated. They're going to be coming on board as a sponsor, sponsoring one of the segments. And one of those segments might be a new segment. Of course, we have the players of the week, the performers of the week, that type of thing. But this year, we're going to try something new. And during the podcast, we're going to have, it might be a head coach, that might be a member of the media, might be an athletic director, might be a player, who knows, who's going to call in the middle of the show. We're going to arrange it. You know, we record this on Sunday mornings, and we're going to have them call in at a certain time. And we may be talking mid-subject, but when they pop in, we're going to start talking to them. And it'll be something that has significance of what's going on in the world of Delaware High School football, either a game that just happened, an issue that came up, or whatever it might be. And so we're excited about that new part of this show. We think it's going to add another thing that our listeners statewide will be interested in doing. So lots of excitement. Middle of August is the official first date of Delaware High School, all the fall sports. And we will figure out when we think it's most beneficial for us to come on the air and start talking about Delaware High School football. But it'll be before the season officially starts. Not sure if it'll be 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, whatever it might be. And a lot of that will depend on what there is to talk about. If something happens significantly before the season even starts and it deserves some attention, we certainly will come on. And that could happen again between now and then. Just like we felt there was enough topics to do a podcast in the middle of May, we may decide that there's a reason to do one at the end of June for whatever reason, and we will do that. But at the same time, as you've come to know, we don't get on here just to talk. We love to talk, but we don't get on here just to talk. You can ask the waitress who was waiting on us at the diner the other day when we had breakfast for 90 minutes talking about a lot of different things. So Marty and I can talk, but we're not going to waste your time talking about stuff you're not interested. So we're going to start today with the class changes and the teams that moved around, the schools that moved around. This was a 2-year plan to do this new Class 3 system. Marty and I agree it worked. Is it perfect? No, but nothing they did was going to be perfect. And what they were doing certainly wasn't perfect. And so it was a good move to make the changes in classes. Now they have in Class 1, which is the smallest schools, they're going to have 16 teams. It'll be 2 divisions of 8. In Class 2, it's going to be 18 teams, 3 divisions of 6. And then perhaps the biggest change that people care about is in Class 3, they went from 11 to 12 teams, which was their goal all along. They said they needed to do that for this to work right. And so that's going to be 2 classes with, Class 3 with 2 divisions of 6 teams each. And so we're going to let's start with Class 1A. And the teams that went from 1A to 2A were Laurel, 2-time state champions, not a lot of competition, went 18-2 over the 2 years. Their 2 losses were to 2A teams, Delmar and Woodbridge. They also beat some 2A teams. Hands down, that was a no-brainer, I think. The other one was Odessa. They requested to move up. I believe the only school in the state that requested to move up.
That is true.
They see the inevitable that they're going to be a Class 3 team most likely when this changes again in 2 years, because they'll reevaluate it in 2 years. This will be the first year Odessa has a senior class. So they've been playing without a senior class, a new school that opened in 2020. And so they just see the inevitable, and they realize that to prepare to be a Class 3 school, which they're going to be in 2 years, they should move up to Class 2 and start to make that move. Marty, any thoughts on either Laurel or Odessa?
Laurel, it's funny because they said, one of the coaches said during the meeting that they had talked to the Laurel officials and they didn't put in a request because they knew they were going to get bumped up.
Why bother?
Yeah, exactly. I think they went, what was it, 24-0 over the 2 years? They had one loss, I think.
18-2.
Yeah, 18
to Delmar and Woodbridge.
Yes, yep. Yeah, 2 teams that were playing, they were playing above their limit, but yeah, they're loaded. They're going to do okay there, but you just could not leave them at the 1A level. And a lot of people thought that St. Elizabeth should have gone with them, and it turned out when Dave Collins was talking during that meeting that St. Elizabeth wasn't even in the conversation to be moved up because of some enrollment limits. But yeah, it's interesting. In Odessa, you and I have talked about it the last couple of years. They're going to be a power soon, very soon at the 3A level. And so this was great for them to make this leap now. They're going to struggle a little bit, of course. It's going to be a learning experience, but yeah, don't sleep on Odessa, folks. They're a comer.
All right, so they moved 4 teams out of 2A down to 1A, 2 of them to replace Laurel and Odessa, and 2 others to kind of just lighten the load in Class 2, which was by far the largest class. Brandywine 2-16 over the 2 years, a no-brainer. Conrad 7-13. When you're looking at who's got to go, there's going to be one of them. McCain 5-15. McCain looked like they were turning the corner. COVID hit, and they never recovered from that. And so I think that's a good move for them. And then AI, of course, had no team in 2022. They forfeited the final 3 games of 2021. So of those 4, they were pretty much the gimme going from 2A to 1A. And Marty, I don't think anybody at any of those 4 schools would argue that they belong in 1A and that they're happy to be there.
No, I agree. And I believe all 4 of these requested to go down, which is, you can understand once you look at the records. I mean, McCain was actually competitive for the 2 years. They had that one game last year that they had a huge lead and they ended up losing in the end, and the season kind of tanked from that point. But they were 0-8 against 2A teams, so their success was coming against the 1A level. So it's going to be interesting to see how they fare down there. All of these schools, like we talked about in the past with Wilmington Charter and Tatnall and some of those schools, it's going to be interesting to see the community and the student response to these teams, which are now going to have a serious chance to be competitive at that level. So hopefully it kind of revives some of the fortunes at some of these schools. You look at like a Brandywine and AI DuPont used to be pretty strong schools that have just fallen by the wayside. So hopefully the move down maybe will draw some more kids out who think, okay, you know what, we're not going to go out there and get crushed every week. We have an opportunity at this level to compete. So I hope that it changes the fortunes of some of these schools.
All right. And then there was perhaps the most controversial one, or at least the most debated and talked about one. And that's the move for St. Mark's from 2A to 3A, which bumped St. George's. St. George's is going to bump over to the other division in that to make room for St. George's. So now 12 teams in Class A. And, this came down, Marty, to a discussion of should it be Archmere, which was 16-4 over the last 2 years. They won a state championship, or St. Mark's, which was 17-2, no state championship in Class 2. And that was kind of Matt Smith's argument, the athletic director. 100 more boys at St. Mark's than Archmere. And I don't put a lot into the population things, because what people don't realize is sometimes the numbers of this population, and you realize, 300 of these kids aren't ever going to play football. And so
Right.
it's that's kind of the unique thing about the population thing. And so I'm not big on that, but St. Mark's was 9-1 in 2022. They did have a Class 3 win over Apo, early in the season. And of course, Appa went on to win the Class 3 Division I title for them. And so, and they talked about the factors that there was 50% of the enrollment size, 50% of the win percentage, compared to Newark, Howard, St. Mark's, and Sussex Tech of those 4 teams. Those were the 4 teams in discussion.
Yep.
Marty, I cover Newark. I like Newark. I love Jody Russell. There's no way Newark would survive in Class 3. So it doesn't take anybody with any expertise to figure out Newark doesn't belong there. Sussex Tech has been struggling. They're not going to, they're not, you're moving those 2 teams up. They're not winning a game is
Right.
what you're looking at. Howard, that's another controversial one. Howard is an A team one year, a D team another year, and it's got nothing to do with anything that anybody at that school is doing. It's just the reality of that population that comes to that school. And it's nothing against anybody, but they can have some superstars and they play great and they do well and they do, and then 2 years later, they don't have the same superstars and they're an average Class 2 team at best when that happens.
No, remember when they successfully fought against moving to 3A when the realignment first started, everybody said, well, they're going to run the table in 2A. Well, they went 5-5 and lost in the first round of the playoffs.
Right. And barely made the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think Matt Smith's most convincing argument during that meeting was the fact that a precedent had been set, because people, if they don't remember, Howard was originally in 3A when the original realignment was released. They were not happy about it. The superintendent was not happy about it. So they sort of took the power away from the DIAA, and the superintendents came up with their own plan, and it moved Howard down. And as you said, it's interesting. Howard wasn't even really considered to move up this time. I think they were 3rd or 4th on that list where they ranked. So, I look at it the same way. I love the fact that St. Mark's is moving up. I know they don't. And look, they're going to take their lumps the first couple of years, probably. But I think it's sort of how when teams move down to 1A and you hope to draw more kids in. I think it's going to increase the interest at St. Mark's that they're now playing against Sally's, Smyrna, Middletown. One of the reasons that when they dropped down to D2 was when they dropped the Sally series, and it was because it was so one-sided. I don't think it's going to be that way anymore. I think Joey Wright is a great head coach. He knows what he's doing. I think he puts his players in a great position to succeed. I think St. Mark's is going to surprise some people at that level. And you and I talked, and I would not be surprised to see them make the playoffs at that level. Odds are against them, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least if they put together a season strong enough to get into the playoffs.
Matt Smith's point was, give us 2 more years. That was his argument, because they projecting right now, they have 762 kids in that school, and they're projecting 900 in 2 years as that school continues to make its way back. Remember, this is a school that was Division I in the semifinals when John Wilson was coaching, dropped down to Division II, and everybody thought, wow, these guys, just like they thought Howard was going to do at Division II, and St. Mark's never, they didn't make the playoffs for the first couple of years, if I recall, and certainly never won a state championship. So you just never know with the way that's going.
And I never understand why they use the enrollment. You brought this up, why they use the school enrollment and not boys enrollment for a sport like football. It doesn't make sense. I mean, you can have 3,000 kids, but you might only have 200 that are even semi interested in playing football. So it's and you're right. He said that the 762, they're looking to be at 900. They're one of the private schools. Remember, St. Elizabeth's and St. Mark's attendance or the enrollment were dropping like a stone. And then all of a sudden in the last 3-4 years, it started to turn around a little bit. St. Elizabeth's enrollment's coming up. St. Mark's is really coming up. I think they won for the 4th or 5th time in a row the private school of the year, which I love that they put a billboard right by Abyssinia Stadium, which highlights that fact. I always love that part of the rivalry. But I think this was the best decision of those 4 teams. If it had been Newark, I'd be worried that within 3 years, Newark wouldn't have a program anymore.
Right. Yep.
They were going to get devastated. So I like the fact that Newark is staying where they are. As you said, Jody Russell's doing a nice job there, but they were not ready to make the leap to 3A.
And if you're looking at with a naked eye on those 4 teams, Newark, Howard, St. Mark's, and Sussex Tech on the sideline, there's only one team that looks like they belong in 3A, just from a number of players and a body size, and that's St. Mark's. And so, you always talk about injuries and that kind of stuff and roster size. And of those 4 schools, say if somebody had to move up, it had to be St. Mark's. And, I don't even think, Matt Smith did argue it, and he should. And that's, that's what his job is to, fend for his school. But I think if you had polled everybody, they would have said, St. Mark's is the only choice to go up and have any shot to compete compared to those other 4 schools.
Yeah, the best movie title to describe that whole thing was Kicking and Screaming, which is how they're being brought into the 3A.
Yeah, but I think they'll win some games. And
I do too.
You know what? They might not go 8-2, but I think a 500 record is not unreasonable for them.
I agree.
So, all right, let's move on to the referees thing. This thing got, it was funny, Marty. We were both on the board meeting here, and they talked about this for every meeting for hours and hours, and all of a sudden it was fixed in 5 minutes. It seems.
Yes.
And so, bottom line is, we're not going to spend a ton of time with this. It's a 1-year agreement because it couldn't be a 5-year agreement for legal reasons. And, there's more legal reasons in the DIAA than any other organization in the country, maybe other than the NCAA. And that's a whole nother podcast for a different time. But the bottom line is the officials' fees for the majority of sports, varsity sports, went up from $84 to $95. And so there were a couple: cross-country running, swimming, and track and field, which are at $80. So they actually took a $4 pay cut, I guess, for lack of a better term. So I want to first credit those officials associations, because if they don't agree to that, those 3, the field, the cross-country, the track and field, and the swimming, if they don't agree to that, this thing might still be going on. But they realize that, there's going to be a difference in some of the sports as far as what people make from one thing to another. And again, don't want to get into a lot of the details. You can Google and find the fee schedules online if you want. Here's my concern, Marty. Year 2 is a gentleman's agreement. Which means as soon as this year expires, whatever that date is, and I don't know, I guess it would be the end of this upcoming season, June, whatever it is.
Yep.
This thing could go right back to where it is, because the gentleman's agreement is only as good as the gentlemen who are involved in making that agreement again for the following year. That concerns me. You have any concerns about that?
I do too. And because part of it is there's turnover in the DIAA board.
Right.
These are people only serve a certain term. I think for the most part, it's 2 years. Is that correct?
I'd be
it's
guessing,
around
I think
there.
it's 2, and you got to get renewed or something like that.
And so it could be a different group of people who look at it and say, from a fiscal perspective, I don't like this anymore.
Yeah.
I remember the athletic directors were okay with this. I think a lot of the principals and superintendents had an issue with it. I mean, one of the problems, of course, is they almost went down a disastrous road. If you recall, they were going to allow the schools or Doug Thompson talked about, hey, let the schools pay the refs, let them work out the agreements. Well, Sally's is probably going to be in a better financial position than Christiana to pay the refs.
It could have been, it could have been the death of sports in some schools.
Absolutely. At least for some of the lower, schools that are struggling right now. Yeah, really, all of the non-private and non-charter schools would have been in trouble with that. So I thought that Walt and his group did a great job of negotiating this. And it's funny because you had said there was the one meeting where Walt and his group basically said, that's it. This was the proposal and we're not doing this. And all of a sudden there was some leeway on the DIAA side. And they're like, when I think they finally realized, look, we don't have an alternative. There are no other officials around here. So, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, those guys are all tied up with their own stuff. So I credit both groups in the end, the DIAA and the officials groups, for finally just kind of getting down to the nitty gritty and getting this worked out, because the only people that were going to suffer were the kids. And to know that it's good for a year is great. And we just hope that the whole gentleman's agreement thing holds. As you said, the legal thing, everybody and their mother had agreed to a 5-year term, and then the lawyer stepped in and said that's not appropriate. So hopefully it works out.
Yeah, we'll see. And we'll see how the shortages come about too. There's a third officials association for football, which has been approved. And said the person running that has said, I'll have 8 crews of 8 people. Is that what it was? It was something. It was like 60 plus new officials who are going to come out of the woodwork somewhere, who haven't been interested in officiating before, but now are. Hey, for the sake of high school football, I hope it's true. And I hope it happens.
Lamar Gunn talked a big game in the meeting. I hope 100% that it's true, because if it is, every sport is going to be covered. And and until proven otherwise, I'd take him at his word. Hopefully this works out. So I think there's didn't there end up being 17 or 18 officials groups now in Delaware, these little splinter groups, but everybody agreed to this proposal. So so far so good.
So we'll see. Let's hope it works. Let's hope in August we're talking good things about everything when it comes to the officials.
And one thing real quick is sportsmanship has got to be a huge part of this too. These guys, when they come out there, and whether it's the DIAA or the schools themselves, have got to start cracking down on some of the things that we see and read on Twitter and some of the game reports that you and I get, where these ridiculous things happen, and they just can't, because you're going to drive these officials away, and we just can't afford to do that.
Yeah, that raise from $84 to $95 is not significant enough to have somebody who officiate and take all the crap that they do from people. And part of that goes back, the onus on that is on the schools too. And because we've been at games and we've been on sidelines where the whole stadium can hear a parent screaming and nobody's doing anything about it.
Right.
And I've always said you kick a parent out of a gym for the season one time, and that's going to calm everybody down for the rest of the season, and kick them out for the season, not just a game. And anyway,
when there's a big incident, everybody, their first thought is, well, what's the DIAA going to do about it? And you and I always say, well, what's the school going to do about it?
Right. It's their game.
They have the reason to step in here and head this off before it gets to the 3-person DIAA.
Right. Yeah. And there's police officers there to handle it as well.
Yep.
And, and I still go back to, and I don't want to belabor this point, but the public should know what happens to these people, because that's going to deter them from doing it. If nobody knows what happens to the mom who went berserk on the head coach, which I saw live and in person one time last year, and nobody hears, well, what happened to her, then you can't tell people, hey, this is what's going to happen if you do this. And
they're at the point where some of the sportsmanship meetings they don't even mention the school anymore. No, which I agree. You got to start calling them out. And it's like the old thing when you're in school and somebody throws a spitball at the teacher and they say, well, if you don't turn somebody in, then everybody's getting punished. Well, guess what? Everybody gets thrown in the same boat unless we start identifying these spitball throwers who are ruining it for everybody else.
So anyway, all right, let's get off the bad news and to the good news, or off the bad things. All right, coaching changes. 11 new changes, and then a 12th, which was a co-coached team at Dickinson, which is now a one-coach team by one of the coaches. So he's not a new head coach, but and Dubin Word is who I'm talking about. He's not a head coach for the first time, but he's going to be a head coach by himself now at Dickinson. 24% of the 46 teams, Marty, and you and I were we can't remember a season, and we asked some people and they couldn't either, where there's been this much turnover. And turnover for different reasons, a couple firings or a couple resignations. And I'm using air quotes for those listening and not watching. A couple, programs that are struggling and they got rid of the coach because they continue to struggle, as if a new coach is going to make it instantly turn it around. And a couple retirements. And so that's going to happen as well. But so anyway, just a incredible amount of new coaches that are going to start out this season with the same goal to win a state championship, which is going to be realistic for a few and not so realistic for others, but we'll talk about that as well. Let's start in Class 1. One of the more interesting hires of Jorge Young was there. They went 3-7. This is First State Military Academy, the Bulldogs, 3-7 in 2021, 3-7 this past year. They beat the same 3 teams both years: Christiana, Dickinson, Early College School. So Young is out, and I'm not sure if we got a clear answer whether he was forced out or just left. But either way, Jeff Braxton, who I believe had more college experience than he did high school experience,
like 30 years. I'm not sure he had any high school experience. He's been everywhere in the college game, including at Delaware State. I mean, when I first saw this hire, and people may not recognize the name right off the bat, but when you go through his resume, you're like, holy smokes, this is probably a really good hire for this school.
And I don't know if he was friends. Alex Carter is the athletic director. I'm not sure how that, relationship started or was, or if there even was one, or it was just posted and he applied for it. But they had 30 kids on their roster last year, 5 seniors. So they got a decent number coming back. The number 30 is not great, right? But they only lost 5 people. They had 4 losses of 30 plus points. your thoughts on this hire.
Well, we asked him what was the reason that drew you to this job, and his number one reason really was the opportunity to build a program from the beginning. He's been through all these college programs, and now he's a head coach for, I believe, the first time. And look, he talks about accountability and getting these kids prepared off the field before they're on the field. I can tell you, I have a niece who goes to First State Military Academy. It is it's almost like DMA in terms of discipline, accountability. These kids are going to be extremely coachable, and these kids haven't experienced any success on the football field. I I talked to my niece, and it's like they don't really acknowledge the football program that much because they haven't really done too much, but they're dying for a team, to root for, to go to games on Friday, Saturday nights,
Right.
whatever. So I think Coach Braxton comes in here at a perfect time. Again, this is a very new school, and if anybody has the tools to do it with his background, it's him. And hopefully they draw some more kids out. And you'd love to see a program like that take off. They've kind of been in the same boat with that early college school down at Delaware State, which is one of the schools I believe they beat both years.
They did. Yep.
But yeah, it's going to be a tough build. It's not going to be easy. They do actually start with a decent, they start with AI DuPont. So it's kind of two teams that are going to be at equal footing in terms of the success recently. But I think Coach Braxton's going to do okay there.
Yeah, I think a reasonable goal, and that's, we're going to talk about teams that we think have the best chance of success, et cetera, et cetera. I think a reasonable goal for First State Military Academy is to get back to 500 and not even this year, but in the next couple years. You mentioned they added AI DuPont, which
Yep.
you don't want to say there's any automatic wins, but again, AI DuPont, a school that didn't have a team last year and forfeited their last 3 games the year before. So they're on the same playing field, for lack of a better term, as First State Military Academy. They did drop Dickinson, which I thought was interesting. If I read the schedule correctly, and I double checked it, but that could always change.
Dickinson
too.
is not on there.
So right now Dickinson's not on there, which was a head scratcher to me, because to me, again, Dickinson being on the same level playing field as First State Military Academy, you would think you'd want to play, if you're Dickinson, you want to play First State and vice versa. So interesting how that happened, but we don't know how schedules, we know how they get done for the most part, but we don't know why that decision was made. It could have been they just couldn't find a date that worked for both of them for whatever reason. Who knows? So anyway, Jeff Braxton, probably the most experienced new coach, certainly at the collegiate level of all of them. So we'll tune in to see how that lasts. All right, speaking of Dickinson, PJ Bufano and Dubin Word, co-coaches last year. Dubin is now the head coach by himself. They were 1-8 2 years ago, 1-9 last year. Those 2 wins were Renaissance Academy was their win 2 years ago, and so they don't have any impressive wins on their schedules. Certainly, last year they had 34 kids on their roster. Their closest loss was 12 points to Christiana. And so, again, a team that has struggled even at the Class 1 level. Marty Dubin didn't get back to us. He was the only coach that didn't, so we don't know a lot of, you reached out to all the coaches and asked the same basic questions and didn't hear back from him. So it's going to be interesting to see. They play AI DuPont. They play the early college school.
Yep.
And they play Christiana in 2023. And so 3 winnable games, 3 losable games, for lack of a better term.
The question for me is those first 4 games, where you have, man, they're up against it. You have Delmar, Friends, Charter, and Tatnall, all playoff teams, of course. So I think one of the hard things for him, and maybe not hard, but a challenging thing is going to be able to keep the kids motivated, which has been the same issue the last couple of years, because I know they've also had roster issues as well, but they start off with that schedule. And if I'm Dubin Ward, I'm like you, I'm looking at AI DuPont, early college, Christiana is down there, Glasgow, which is new, is on there. So I with a new coach, I should say. So there are a couple winnable games. It just depends with a school like Dickinson. And I always think the same thing about Brandywine, Christiana, Glasgow. It's about how many kids they can draw out at the beginning of the year. Because if that roster size is small, like for 2 years, I think AI DuPont kind of flirted with not having enough. And I remember Brad Myers wrote an article, and it was kind of praising AI DuPont, and they played a game with, I think, 14 players. And I'm thinking, my God, if you're AI DuPont, how do you You play that just doesn't seem right.
No, right.
Which eventually they did shut everything down, and then
Mhm.
of course canceled the season last year. So yeah, I think Dubin Ward, as you said, he was the only coach I wasn't able to establish contact with. Um, it's going to be tough going for them to start the season, but if he can draw kids out and motivate them, and get things going, the off-season program is a big thing with every coach that I communicated with. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It's going to be a tough season again, I think, for Dickinson.
Yeah, for those schools that you rattled off, a lot of times what happens is on August 15th or whatever the date is this year, in the middle of August, they only have 25 kids out. And then
Right.
when kids get back into school, all of a sudden another 10 kids show up. And, that's something that's changed. I remember Jody Russell at Newark telling me, yeah, we know our roster size is going to jump on the first day of school. And I thought, you know what? Could you imagine walking up to Butch Simpson on the first day of class and say, "Hey, coach, I'm here to try out for the team."
Helmet?
Yeah. I mean, things have changed, and
they've definitely changed.
It's nobody's fault, but they have changed, and in some schools that wouldn't happen. You're not walking up to Gene Deladon at Sally's on the first day of class and announcing you're ready to try out for the football team that's been practicing since August 15th.
And we're kind of in a beggars can't be choosers situation with a lot of these schools,
right,
at the 1A level.
Yeah, because you're not going to start a season with 22 players, so you need those other 10 that show up that first day of classes when all.
And if for nothing else, for practice reasons, so you have bodies at practice. So yeah, it's always difficult, always challenging for these schools.
All right, so let's go on to Christiana, another one of those schools. Casey Ryan was there for 3 years. I thought Casey did a decent job. Did he win 5 games every year? No, but neither has anybody before him. And it'll be interesting to see. Brian Wood is the new coach there. He was at West Catholic High School for 2 years, and he was the defensive coordinator at Oxford High School for 4 years. Christiana, 1 win each of the last 2 years, both of them against Dickinson. They had 23 on their roster, according to the websites for sports roster. 7 of them were seniors. So a number that shocked me there is that they were down from 32 the year before. And that I'm not sure if that had something with the decision to not have Casey Ryan come back. This is a case where it was not Casey's choice not to coach this year. Is the roster size going down? Because he did some other good things. They, they redid their weight room a little bit. They had their first night game ever. And, so they had some exciting things going on with the football. Brian Wood's coming in. We'll see, not a Delaware guy, obviously, but not sure how much that matters. Might be a good thing, in fact, but we'll see. A good goal for Christiana is 2 wins. You've had 1 win the last 2 years. To win 2 this year would be a successful season.
And, he said that he's been trying to crack into the Delaware coaching ranks for a few years now. So the Christiana job was open. He applied. And I like that one of the things he said about the off season that he was interested in doing was team bonding activities, which I think is great, because in today's high school world with cell phones and all that stuff, I don't know that kids hang out a lot anymore. At least stories, I hear from my nieces, nephews in high school, things like that. So I like the fact that one of the things he wants to do, because you're going to have a very small roster size, is make sure these guys work as a unit. They work as a team. Everybody's getting along. There's a common goal. As you said, it's going to be tough. The first game is against Newark, which will probably not be pretty. But then they get First State Military Academy, the 2 new coaches going at it. So you never know. And then they have AI DuPont. It's not out of the realm of possibility that they're 2-1 at that point. I don't know if that'll happen, but this is, again, at the 1A level, you have opportunities if you can turn something around quickly. And with new kids coming in every year, you just don't know what you're going to have. But Brian was really excited to be coaching in Delaware, and he just feels like there's a strong foundation that he can build from here, and that he can bring a lot to the table.
Yeah, you mentioned First State and AI. They also have Dickinson, the only team they've beaten the last 2 years.
That's right.
So, there's 3 winnable games for this program right off the bat. All right, down same district, down the road, Glasgow. The Glasgow coaching has been a carousel since Shannon Riley left before COVID. He built that program up. They won the conference championship 1 year, and then it started going down again for whatever reasons. And he left to start his own business. And I want to say there's been at least 3 coaches since Shannon Riley, McAdoo, Harrison, Dixon, the most recent one. Ricky Brown coming over from McCain, where he was an assistant coach for 7 years, also a head coach for girls basketball. And you might say, well, what's that have to do with football? Well, he has been the head coach of a varsity sport, which is different than being an assistant coach. forget the X's and O's, but how you run a program as a head coach is different than your role as an assistant coach. So I think it definitely helps Glasgow that he has never been a head football coach, but he's got the football coaching experience, but he has been a head girls coach. Glasgow was 3-7. 3-7. Those wins were against early college, Christiana and Dickinson, a lot of the schools we talked about here. In 2022, they had 2 somewhat close losses. They had 33 on their roster, 8 seniors. So, they've got at least 25 kids who should be back guaranteed, and you throw in another 10 freshmen, your roster's right about where you want to be. I think that's a good hire for Glasgow. I like that he's familiar with the teams he's going to be playing. I like that he's familiar with Delaware. And so, and he's a good story. It's one of those things you want to root for Ricky Brown because I think he's the one, if I recall, that he didn't play high school football because of an injury situation. And he decided then he wanted to coach. And now he's getting that chance to coach.
Right. Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity for him. And I like, we asked, one of the questions was, what, attracted you to this job? And his was, he saw the athletes that are in place at Glasgow, and he said, excuse me, that the biggest challenge for him and his staff, and one that he thought they could overcome, was to convince these kids, that these good athletes, that when you're on the football field, if you play together, we can win. At the level we're at, we can get some things done. And so he's very positive about that. And his whole thing is just, let's lay everything out for the kids, which I assume, it just seemed like an upfront guy that's going to be honest with the kids about their situation, but have that enthusiasm that, look, this is going to get better if you put in the work. And he worked under Matt Carr for the last several years, and Matt, by all accounts, everybody has thought has done a fantastic job as a head coach. Though the results may not have always been there because of the roster size and things like that. But for Ricky Brown, the biggest thing is, and we'll talk about this later in our other segment, but his schedule is a killer. He starts off with 3 2A teams: Sussex Tech, Red Lion, and Woodbridge. And then he has Tatnall, St. Elizabeth's, and Charter. So the first 6 games are absolute killers. It does get a little easier: Christiana, AI, Dickinson, and then, of course, McCain they finish with. But with him being able to convince the athletes that they can do something, it's going to be a challenge at the beginning of the season. It's really going to challenge his head coaching skills. But everybody I've heard from that knows Ricky, and I talked to some coaches about some of these different guys, and has been nothing but positive. And they said, look, if anybody can turn this thing around, it's him. Yeah. So again, Glasgow is one of those programs. It wasn't too long ago. I think they had a 9-1 season, maybe 6-7 years ago. They were close to the number 1 seed, and may have been the number 1 seed in the tournament. But it's again one of those schools, Christiana, Brandywine, Glasgow, that has fallen on hard times with the enrollment. So it's going to be a challenge for Ricky Brown. But again, it seems like a good guy to have in place to do it.
Yeah, school choice has not helped programs Glasgow, Christiana, Brandywine, Dickinson. There are other options for kids to go other places as long as parents are willing to drive them to school, and plenty certainly are. He's another one. When I interviewed him for my Newark Post column, he talked about the off-field relationships and how important that was, and how he seemed to think that was something that's been missing at Glasgow the last couple of years, which is going to happen when you've got a carousel of head coaches coming in and out, and a lot of changes there. So hopefully Ricky Brown can turn things around there at Glasgow Dragons. All right, let's go down to Class 2, up to Class 2, I should say, and let's go down to Milford, where Sean Strickland was the head coach for 8 years. He was in the D1 title game back in 2017. He took the CR job, which opened up an opportunity for a good friend of ours, Jed Bell, who was a head coach at Woodbridge, an assistant for several years, then a head coach there when Ed Manlove retired. And then Jed went to work for the DIAA for maybe not even a year. And so he's a 2007 grad of Milford. And so it's one of those things where it was a perfect storm for him, because he was interested in being a head football coach again, where he could work with the kids. I can't remember the gentleman who passed away from cancer down at Woodbridge, the player. Remember that story?
Troy Haynes, I believe.
Believe Troy for sure. Haynes, right. Hopefully, but I just remember how every story that came out about that, Jed was intimately involved in that whole situation from beginning to, unfortunately, sadly, the end, but even then afterward, as they paid tributes and did
Right.
fundraisers and stuff like that. And so, you just got the feeling, and again, we both know Jed a little bit personally outside of the football realm, and we've gotten to know him better doing the show, that, Jed's one of those guys, his life fulfillment is working with kids and being a coach. It's not sitting in the DIAA office dealing with sportsmanship issues, and he was great at the job. Don't get me wrong, and I'll say that as a committee chair, as well as an innocent bystander, listening to other committee meetings. He was great at the job. There's no question about that. And so, but he's back where he belongs. And I met him the other day at school. I had to drop some equipment off or pick something up for Special Olympics, and I said, "How's the new job?" He says, "I'm in heaven, John." That's exactly the term he used. He said, "I live 5 minutes from here. I'm back at my alma mater.
Yep.
I'm coaching football. I'm running the athletic programs," which he didn't. He was never the athletic director at Woodbridge, but he did a lot of, he was kind of like the unofficial assistant athletic director. And so he is just excited about the opportunity there. And he understands Milford. Just as Sean Strickland went back to his alma mater at Caesar Rodney, after coaching as an assistant coach for Caesar Rodney. If you want to say he went to Milford to get groomed as a head coach, you can say that. And he's back at his alma mater.
Yep.
Jed Bell, same thing at Woodbridge. And now he's back at Milford. And, we wish him nothing but the best. They've only won 3 games the past 2 years. They beat Red Lion. They beat Sussex Tech, where their only wins against Delaware teams, because Milford plays a couple Maryland teams outside of the state, and they picked up some wins doing that. So had 42 kids on the roster last year. That was up from 32 the year before. So that's a good thing. And I would think having a guy like Jed Bell as the head football coach at Milford does a couple things, Marty. It keeps any player who was thinking about transferring out of Milford from doing so, most likely. And maybe not every player, but anybody that was on the fence is probably staying now. And it's also maybe going to get some kids who thought, I'm not going to go out for this team. They're only going to win 3 games. Why would I want to do that? Now they've probably changed their heart. And that's how you build a program back up. It starts with, as you've alluded to with a couple of these other schools, it starts with the roster size. If you've got 50 kids on your roster at Class 2, you're going to do a lot better than if you only have 30. And if you have 70, like St. Mark's had more than 70 when they were in Class 2 the last couple of years, you're going to do really well. And so, we wish Jed nothing but the best. I hope he gets that thing turned around down there. And I think he will.
I do too. I think, his biggest thing in answering our questions was, I'm home. This is I love this community. And I love that he said, it gives me an opportunity now to give back to the community that gave me so much. And he said, his thing is to hit the ground running. Their summer program is well underway. The coaches are in place. So there's a lot of good things there. It's funny, and he'll probably hate me for saying this, but my lasting image of Jed in the DIAA was there was a contentious meeting going on, and I forget what the topic was. Go ahead and grab bag of things here. But Jed jumped in and basically said, hold it a minute. He gave this impassioned plea about, let's remember that we're all here for the kids. And it went on for about 2 or 3 minutes, and it was perfect. And it was met with crickets, which I thought couldn't it be a better, way to view how the DIAA works at some of these meetings now. And it's funny. I always wonder in the back of my head, wonder if that's when Jed thought, you know what? I'm really looking forward to this coaching thing again. Because remember, he stuck around for a little bit after he got the job to help with the transition with the DIAA. He had some great ideas, and he and I had communicated about the DIAA and things. But this was just, when this came up, you could just tell the excitement that this was everything he wanted. And again, like you said, 5 minutes from his house. I think he's going to be fantastic here. He's a great guy. And, this is a program. It's kind of great. It comes in where it's not in a great position in terms of how they've done in the past recently. Not that Sean didn't do a good job there, but they've had some hard times on the field lately. So Jed gets to come in here and kind of build things again a little bit. And, they start off Mount Pleasant's their first game. William Penn is their second game, which is interesting because with William Penn, God knows what you're going to get these days at the 3A level. So you never know what you're going to get there. And then Del Castle and Concord. So Jed's got the opportunity to really hit the ground running with this team. And I think he and the coaching staff he's putting together As you said, they're going to get these kids motivated, and I expect him to be successful there. I just think the guy seems to be successful at whatever he does. So I don't expect that to change at Milford. And I think it's a great marriage of the school, the community, and Jed. So I think that's going to work out great.
I'd love to have my kids play for him. But I think that's the greatest compliment you can give a coach.
I agree.
I'd have my kids play for him in a heartbeat. It wouldn't matter what the sport was. You mentioned they added William Penn. They also dropped Sussex Central.
Yes.
So addition by subtraction there. Nothing against William Penn, and they may end up being a powerhouse. I don't know. And Matt Sable does a nice job with that team, and so they certainly could have a rebound year this year. But based on last year, if you're going to pick which of those two teams you'd rather play William Penn.
I agree.
The other thing is they're not playing any Maryland teams, at least as the schedule stands right now. And that was 2 of their 3 wins last year. So I think one of the things Jed Bell is trying to do is, let's play Delaware teams. We're a Delaware school. We don't need to go play an hour and a half away to pick up a win. Let's let's build it so every team we play in here, we have a chance to win.
Yep.
So, all right. One of the great things Jed did with the IAA is the handling of the Nick Lincoln situation with DMA. We're not going to rehash that whole thing other than say Nick Lincoln is gone. And Matt Carey from McCain is in. 2 coaches ago, DMA swiped up Mike Ryan from McCain, longtime athletic director, longtime football coach, worked very well for a few years there. He then left and went to Del Tech. And that's when Nick Lincoln came in. I think Nick Lincoln was the next coach after that. So now they've got another one from McCain. Matt Carey, a Delaware guy, played at Howard, went up and played at the University of Pennsylvania. So he comes over. He's not the athletic director at DMA. Jeremy Jean is still in that position. And so Matt Carey has an opportunity, and I believe he said this when you talked to him, Marty, he wants to focus on being a head football coach. His family, he's got 2 kids now. And the athletic director job is busy enough, but when you add on to that you're also the head football coach, your life becomes crazy busy. And so he inherits a team that went 9-1 2 years ago, made it to the state title game and lost. Last year they went 5-5. They lost in the first rebound to Lake Forest. And what a lot of people in that football program at DMA, it was a season to forget is how they're putting it, between the Nick Lincoln, the suspension, all that other stuff that went on. They had the week 1 gun incident, which wasn't DMA's fault, but it was part of the season last year. That's how their season got kicked off with that at Abyssinia against Howard. So just a season to forget last year. You wipe the slate clean, and Matt Carey is going to come in and try to build this program is not the right term. It's already been built, but they haven't had the success in the postseason that you would think they've had. They've had wonderful regular seasons. And then it wasn't until I think it was 2 years ago they finally won a playoff game.
Won a playoff game.
They went into postseasons with records, with only 2 or 1 loss every, a couple seasons in a row, and got bounced in the first round. So they want to be a football powerhouse. I think they envision themselves being a Class 3 school at some point. Whether that certainly has been put on hold, and the last couple years hasn't helped push them in that direction up further there. And I think they're glad to still be, they weren't even considered to move to Class 3, and I think they were glad about that. So it's going to be interesting to see what Matt Carey's able to do, and what kind of players he is able to get who want to come and not only play for DMA but attend DMA and more of the military type education that you get.
And that's the big part of it too. You're right. You're going to get a certain type of kid that wants to do that. And Matt, one of the things he said was the 2 biggest things that kind of stood out in his response to us was roster size, which of course is going to be, versus McCain, it's just night and day, I'm sure, in terms of the kids they're going to draw out for sports, and maybe not all of them stick around for football specifically. But and the other thing was the facilities, which my driveway, I can see DMA. It's right up the street. And I drive by the facilities every day. Boy, folks, they added a huge practice field over the summer. And again, it's, the donations that they're getting and what they're able to draw has been phenomenal. This is a program that has always, I think the knock on them, as you said, was always the great regular seasons and then the flame out in the playoffs. And a lot of that was due to frankly, the schedule they played during the regular season. Matt's going to pay for that this season.
Right.
I think he's the recipient of somebody finally saying, okay, we need to upgrade the schedule. And it's funny because their schedule is just, and we'll get into the specifics later. But when your first game as a head coach is against Sally's, at Sally's
Yeah,
on a
right.
Friday night or on a Thursday night. Actually, it's one of the kickoff games. So this is 8 of their first 9 games are against playoff teams from last year. So it's going to be tough. They have a lot of talent coming back. I do know there's a player that's kind of in flux that may be trying to transfer, one of the star players, but I think Matt is walking into a great situation here. As you said, he wanted to be transition away from the AD spot because of his family and things like that, and just get into the coaching football.
Right.
And the results may not have always been there at McCain, but every time I ask around, the respect for Matt is huge,
Hmm.
and what he's been able to do. So I know Jeremy conducted an exhaustive search
Right.
for this, and I mean that. So I think they feel like they got the right guy, and I think one of the things Jeremy wanted to do too with Matt was remove the stigma that had been associated with Nick and some of the things that happen. And Matt is just it's going to be a breath of fresh air
Right.
for the parents and the kids there. And I think it's a credit to him that he got this job. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what he does this season. They may take some lumps. And again, we'll
Mhm.
get into the specifics of that later. They may be a lot of lumps. You talk about death by 1,000 cuts. This may be death by a sledgehammer, but it's going to be interesting. But if nothing else, he's going to change the culture there. And I think that was desperately needed at this point. So I credit Jeremy for the hire. I think Matt's a great choice here, and hopefully gets hits the ground running.
You mentioned the interview process, and one of the things I thought was brilliant that Jeremy did was he had the finalists, whether it was 2 or 3, come in and
Yep.
actually run an off-season conditioning practice,
I have
which
never
is
heard of that before.
perfectly legal.
Yep. I
And
thought the same thing.
and what a great idea to see, what are you going to do with these kids? What would you do with these kids in a day? And and obviously Matt passed that test with flying colors, and so he's going to be out there hoping to win games for Delaware
Yep.
Military Academy.
Yep.
So we'll see, and again we'll talk more about their tough schedule.
I look forward to hearing the band every Friday night when they're at home games here, and I'm watching the games on YouTube and TV, and in the background is the DMA band going nuts.
Maybe they'll have you come out and do the honorary toss for the
There you
first
go.
game, the first home game there, since you just have to walk down the street for
That's
that.
right.
So anyway, so DMA, Matt Carey, that of course opened up the McCain job, and Avery McMullen was hired for that. If that name rings a bell, it's because he was the coach at Tatnall. All he did, Marty, was reach the semifinals 2 years in a row and then get fired, basically.
This was the old we're moving in a different direction, which we've heard from other coaches before. And in almost every case, it's that the administration had something crazy going on. And this was so bizarre. But to their credit, I love the fact that McCain snatched Avery up, because I think he's going to be phenomenal here. But yeah, he reaches the semifinals in his first 2 years with Tatnall. One of the things he did, which we talked about with some of the other schools at the 1A level, is reinvigorate the program.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's going to have the same effect. He's a young guy. He was a college quarterback. His staff at Tatnall, I recall, was made up of only every coach had, I believe, Division 1A college coaching experience.
Wow.
So he has a lot of connections. And McCain, the first thing I think of when I think of McCain is the quarterback, McKeevis Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
And the way Avery's offense runs, I think he and this kid are going to be a match made in heaven. And I really expect him to hit the ground running. I mean, Avery, one of the things he liked was that they are transitioning from 2A to 1A, which, depending upon how you look at it could be a good thing. He's now going to get a program where these kids are going to look and see, okay, we had some success at the 2A level, but we definitely have what we need to compete at the 1A level. And maybe that Avery and the enthusiasm and the young coaches and things like that, they get some more kids to come out. I know he's big on the off-season program, but I really think that he's going to be able to not turn it around necessarily, but that he's going to have success early at McCain. I think he's one of those coaches that is just going to be able to get that done. And again, I think there's the perfect marriage between him and the offensive guys who are coming back for this season. So it could be an exciting season there. They have it's going to be some tough games there. They got St. Elizabeth's in their third game, but they start with Conrad and Mount Pleasant. So a chance, I mean, Conrad's not a slouch, and they're moving down to the 1A level, but I think Avery's going to, again, I hate to keep saying hit the ground running, but I think Avery's going to do that at McCain.
They were 1-9 coming out of COVID, jumped to 4-6 last year, but that was also with some of the AI players.
Yep.
When AI folded, McCain graciously accepted them over to their team. They beat Polytech, Odessa, Conrad, and Del Castle last year. I looked at the 2023 schedule, and the winnable games are Conrad, Del Castle, AI, Dickinson, Christiana, and Glasgow. So
Yeah.
you could come out, you could have a winning record your first year as a head coach at a program that's had several years, but since it's had a winning record. But here's the date I'm looking forward to: October 7th, McCain at Tatnall.
At Tatnall. That's interesting. Yes, I saw
So,
that too. A Saturday game, 11 o'clock, which Tatnall is famous for those Saturday games,
yep.
those Saturday morning games.
So
But
Avery,
yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. And he's going to get that squad fired up for that meeting.
He's going to want to prove that Tatnall is going in a different direction for whatever reason. So anyway, best of luck to Avery McMullen there. All right. Speaking of Tatnall,
yeah, nice lead in.
So Avery McMullen out, Brendan Ironton in, and this is the most baffling one to me, Marty. And I couldn't find, he comes from Archbishop Curley.
Yep.
He was a head coach before that at Kent County High School, went down in Maryland for 5 years. Then he was a defensive coordinator for 5 years at Archbishop Curley before becoming the head coach. And I believe he was there 2 years as the head coach, if I'm right. And I couldn't find a lot of solid information, and maybe you have something better, but he coached at the Maryland Interscholastic Athletic Association for Archbishop Curley, which is a very legitimate conference down there.
Yeah.
I covered them when I wrote for Max Prep. So, my first question was, why would you want to leave that school to come coach Tatnall? And I couldn't find, and maybe you did, whether he got let go or left on his own or what that situation is. But it's interesting that, you have a coach that's coming. I assume he's moving to Delaware because that place isn't around the corner.
Right.
It wouldn't be around the corner if he was coming to Newark,
Yep.
let alone another 40 minutes up the road to Tatnall. Not 40 minutes, but you know what I'm saying. So just an interesting hire for Tatnall. To me,
I agree. I didn't find anything about why he left or what the circumstances were, but everything I looked at was successful. He was he's been a successful coach, loved by the community, it sounded like. And I like his answer to why Tatnall was the first thing he said was the smaller school environment.
And it is.
Maybe, the hustle bustle, these huge schools in these different states, and you come to a school like Tatnall, and I think there's an opportunity a lot more for, as you said before, talking about some of the advantages at the level with smaller rosters is the one-on-one time with the head coaches and other position coaches, things like that. You get to spend more time with these individual players. He loved the facilities, the resources, the AD, which I think her name's Katie Phillips. Katie Phillips. He said the first time I met with her, we just kind of clicked in terms of what we're looking for, and philosophy of running the program. And that's big at a school like Tatnall, which is, it's they've had success in different sports. Football, they've never really not been a steady player at all. And Avery the last couple of years has really gotten them. They didn't win a ton of games, let's say that, because the way it was set up with the district and things like that, it worked in their favor. And by the way, we should probably mention that at some point, is that the district stuff doesn't mean anything anymore, because the DIAA, I believe, changed everything to every playoff spot will now be determined by point index at all three levels. So the games within your district don't mean as much anymore. But I think he says his first priority is working on the culture, discipline, things like that, which every coach is going to want to do. And he's the only one that well, not the only one, but I want to make this about life lessons. My job is to make these kids or help to mold these kids into adults. Mature adults. And I think that's a great thing to put on your answers to what one of your first priorities is. A lot of them were weight room or off-season things. But some of the coaches did say, I want to help build relationships and get these kids ready for adult life. And again, everything I could find about Brendan was successful. So the fact that he aligns philosophically with the AD Katie Phillips, and the fact that Avery laid the groundwork for success at that level, I expect Brendan to do a nice job right off the bat there. He's, their opening game, his opening game as a head coach at Tatnall will be against a non Robbie Tattersall led Friends. So you
Yeah.
never know what kind of Friends school you're going to get this year. But after that, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 possible winnable games, with the exception of maybe Tower Hill, which is going to be a big rivalry for him. He'll find out that Tatnall and Tower Hill are rivals, but their schedule is really set up for success, I think. So Brennan has a chance to get in there and experience some success right off the bat. And given his background, I wouldn't expect anything less.
And they dropped Archmere, who they lost 42-0 to last year. So they don't play, that's one less loss automatically. Of all the coaches we've talked about so far, Marty, I would think he's under the most pressure to come in and have a winning season. The rest we're talking about 2 wins, 3 wins, maybe 500.
Yep.
When you inherit a program that went 6-4 2 years ago and 5-5 last year and made the semifinals in your class, the expectations would be certainly to get to the playoffs. Anything shy of not getting to the playoffs, or anything shy of getting to the playoffs, I should say, is going to be a fail. I hate to use the word failed season, but it's going to be a disappointment if they're not back in the playoffs.
And we didn't even talk about doing a segment like that, but I kind of did the same thing. And I said the 2 coaches I thought were under the most pressure, in quotes kind of there, but are Brendan Ireton and Gene Deladon at Sally's.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're inheriting programs that have had some success, and now you've got to, at very least, keep it at that level. Right. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting for Brennan. But again, based on his background, it looks like he's a great choice for this job.
And we didn't dive deep in our research about, who left that program graduating and stuff like that. And,
right.
So if there could be a complete roster turnover that we don't know about, or somebody might transfer because there's a new coach.
I was going to say there's always transfers out of the
right.
1A level to the higher level schools. Yeah. And so, that stuff, we start to reckon with that come August when we see what these rosters start to look like.
In Delaware, we have like a transfer portal situation like the NCAA, because of school choice, anybody can go anywhere. And so you might as well call it what it is. And
that could be its own podcast someday too.
Yeah, exactly. So let's not get into that. So anyway, all right. So let's go to Mount Pleasant. This is a situation with a retirement. Coach Randy Holmes retires after 20 years. Stood with that program through the thick and the thin. Had some success. Had some poor seasons and everything in between. The inheritor of that job is Jeff Allen, who was the associate head coach at Mount Pleasant, and he's been there 6 years. I don't know anything about Jeff Allen, but I like that they brought in a coach who understands Mount Pleasant, understands the program, understands the district, understands the expectations. There's not going to be any surprises to that. And so I like when a school hires one of its own, if it's going to be the right fit. And clearly it was, or they wouldn't have hired Jeff Allen. The last 2 years since COVID, 5-4, 4-5, didn't make the playoffs. They beat Lake Forest, Howard, and Tower Hill. I should say their tough losses in 2022 were against Lake, Howard, and Tower Hill. You win 2 of those games, and all of a sudden you're 6-3 instead of 4-5. And so a decent season for Randy Holmes last. Would have loved to make the playoffs, certainly, but a respectable season. In 2023, weeks 4 through 9, they played Newark, Tower Hill, Archmere, Red Lion, and Wilmington Friends, which are all going to be challenging games for them. And so, it's going to be a situation where Jeff Allen's going to come in and you're going to see what happens. And I don't think there's pressure for him to make the playoffs necessarily, but Mount Pleasant's a school that if you only win 1 or 2 games, it's going to be a huge disappointment. So I think what he's looking at is, hey, 500 is a good place to be. Given
I agree. And I think
else.
One of the things that's interesting is, as I said, they're going to the point index for playoffs starting this year. And if, because this is what I do, we have to kill time after the grandkids leave.
Do you already have next year's playoffs laid out?
I do.
No,
going back to last year, I actually did the point index for all 3 divisions, and Mount Pleasant would have made the playoffs last year if it was based on point totals. I think they would have been 11th out of the 12 teams. Yeah.
And that was an argument we always had. There were teams that were finished 4th and 5th in their division, but didn't make the playoffs because of a third team in the other division that was not nearly as good as them. So that was a good move by the
Yep,
DIAA.
and I think we'll talk about that more in August because I
Yeah.
think there's a lot there about how the district versus the point index. But yeah, Jeff Allen, I love his answer to me. Is one of his first answers was he's been there for 6 years and he sees this program as a sleeping giant. I love
Mhm.
that because a guy who's been in the program, maybe there's some different things he's seen that he can do with the athletes that are there or
Yep.
whatever, and it just you can feel his like enthusiasm. He always wanted to be a head coach. So a guy like that is going to come in and just, um, try to get his stuff in place as soon as possible. One of the things he said, because they're a young team, not a lot of experience, they got to get their system in, get guys reps immediately to figure out what they have. And I think he's positioned in a great spot for Mount Pleasant because what you said, being promoted from within, he's seen what they have, he's seen what they can do and what they can't do. And I think a guy like that is going to be great for this. And again, I
Mhm.
always love the first time head coaches because you just know the enthusiasm, and you're going to get smacked in the face sometimes. Let's
Mhm.
face it, especially
Yep.
when you look at his schedule. But I also think he sounds like one of those guys who's going to be able to work through those and work to convince these kids, he and his staff, that they can win at this level. So
Yeah.
I like this hire too. I think this took a long time. This almost
It did.
a really long time. It was one of the last hires, but I think Jeff seems like a great choice for this job.
Yeah, I think so too. We wish him nothing but the best. All these coaches, nothing but the
Yep.
best. But he's one who always good to see them hire within, as I mentioned. So, all right, let's go to Class 3. There were two gimmies here that were going to happen, and one shocker.
Yep.
The gimmies were Caesar Rodney High School in Hodson. Dan Candeloro struggled the last couple seasons. They've had large roster sizes, but not the success. 0-10 2 years ago, 1-9 last year. Playing in the Class 3, a very tough division, and I had a couple conversations with Dan off not off the record, but off the record, and he said we're going to win 2 or 3 games, going into them, and they didn't even do that, and but they had some close games. So,
Yep.
but anyway, Sean Strickland comes from Milford, comes home. He was an assistant coach at Caesar Rodney for several years, and then went to Milford, probably to groom himself as a head coach, which we've seen happen in different sports in Delaware, knowing ultimately he always wanted to come back to Caesar Rodney High School where he is. Strickland was 41-37 at Milford. He reached the D1 title game a few years ago, but the last 4 years, he's been 12-24. And so disappointing seasons at Milford. But again, he left Milford on his own. This wasn't
Yep.
a case where
Yep.
he was let go. And fortunately, the Caesar Rodney job opened up. He wanted the Caesar Rodney job. He's a CR alum, as I mentioned. He played on both ways on the line. Then he went on and played college football at Lehigh. He was an assistant coach at the Hill School in Pennsylvania, at Wesley College, and as I mentioned, at Caesar Rodney High School. And so he was 5-2 in 2020. Now it's a COVID year, so that COVID
Yep.
year is what it is, and that's why
Yep.
we haven't talked a lot about how teams did in the COVID year. They were conference champs in 2017. This is Caesar Rodney now we're talking about, not when he was at Milford. And they lost to Hodson in the first round, and that was Dan Candeloro's most successful year, and the last successful year it kind of went down.
Yep.
I think he might have made it the following year. He might have squeaked into the playoffs and lost or something like that. But anyway, and 2023, Caesar Rodney, their first 5 games are William Penn, and then Class 2, Lake Forest and Laurel, both respectable Class 2 teams.
Yep.
The newest Class 3 member, St. Mark's, and then the struggling, what has been a struggling Hodson team. And
Yep.
so, if you're looking at this schedule and you're optimistic, you're thinking, William Penn only won a couple more games than we did last year.
Yep.
That could be a win. We're playing 2 Class 2 teams. Those could be wins. We're playing the newest Class 3 team. That could be a win. And we're playing what's been a struggling Hodson program, also with a new head coach. We could be 5-0. The pessimist looks at that schedule and said, well, you're starting out 0-5. And so that's, it's one of these things that's why they play the games on the field.
Yes.
So that you don't figure your wins and losses out the way I just did.
This is one of those, to me, this is a complete wild card. I mean, first of all, Coach Strickland coming over is great. Just the same thing as Jed Bell. He's coming home. He played for Coach Schoenwolf there and had some success. And he said he's one of the guys that he really learned from and wants to kind of get the program back to that level. He basically said the same thing as Jed. He said, this is a dream come true. This opportunity came up. And, for the short time before he was hired, this was the worst kept secret anywhere, because he is a coach who had some success and who was a perfect fit for Caesar Rodney. And Caesar Rodney, as you said, has been struggling. And one of the things he pointed out too was the number of players,
Mhm.
which we learned last year was, believe second only to Sally's in the
Yep.
state. They had like 140 players come out for preseason practice,
Yep.
which is insane in today's world. Those numbers in Delaware just don't happen that much anymore. So the things he said that we're getting off the ground is we have so much, the numbers, that we have so many kids. We have a lot of young kids, but we have a lot of veteran kids who basically have been through the ringer the last
Mhm.
few years, and they want to win. So they're going to try to get these young kids up to speed. And I just think this job is such a wild card because, Caesar Rodney and those 140 kids, there have got to be some great athletes. And if Sean Strickland can find a way to put them in a position to be successful, I think they fall into the category of sleeping giant again. I mean,
Yeah.
Caesar
Yep.
Rodney, because of the size of the school, they get the right kids in the right places, they could erupt at some point. And again, the schedule is challenging. The end of the season, the last quarter of the season, it's like a murderer's row. But they have a chance to have some success early on. And I think it may not come in wins and losses right away. They were blown out a lot
Right.
over the last several years. I think they need to get back to competing and challenging some of these teams. And I think they've shown flashes of that. I think Sean will get them, and his coaching staff will get these kids in the right spots. And again, I think, this is not a shot at Coach Candelore at all. He's done a great job over the years, but sometimes a fresh set of eyes
Yep.
comes in and
New
sees some
blood.
things different.
Yep.
Exactly. And maybe it reinvigorates the kids somehow. And so I think, again, this is a program that could be on the rise. So going to be very interested to watch what Sean does over the next several years.
Yeah, so we'll see. Caesar, like sleeping giant, is a perfect description. They got one of the nicest sports facilities in the state, and they don't lose a lot of kids to the surrounding
Right.
school. You're not going to leave Caesar Rodney to go play football at Dover or Polytech. And again, nothing against those programs. It's just not. There's not the programs that they have up in Newcastle County where people jump around. That just doesn't
Yes.
happen in Kent and Sussex County, which I like. But another story for another time. But anyway, so Sean Strickland going home, and so that takes us to Hodson. Dave Collins not going home because he
This was the second
is
worst
home.
kept
This
secret.
Is this is the second worst best secret. Frank Moffitt Jr. retires after 20 years, 4 titles, 2 of them I think it was 3 in Division II and the 1 in Division I.
I believe so.
Is what it was, yeah. And Dave Collins, who was his assistant coach all 20 years, been the offensive coordinator since 2006. He's also been a defensive coordinator. He's been a special teams coordinator. He played at Hodson. Marty, this was one where he had to go through the regular interview process, and
Yep.
they took forever to hire him. And
They did.
I just don't understand when that happens. This was a hire. If it didn't happen, I was ready to use my space in the Newark Post to rip everybody who was involved in the hiring process. But fortunately, he did get hired.
Yep.
He's a great guy. He's a great coach. I get to see, he's my neighbor. I think people have figured that out by now. And I get a chance to see him outside the football field. And I see him at his kid's t-ball game, cheering him on. He's just he's another one that, just like Jed Bell, I'd have my kids play for in a heartbeat, no matter what the sport.
And he's involved in so many different things. I mean, he was the big guy behind realignment, one of the guys who worked on the realignment thing. So if you have St. Mark's, if you have a complaint, send it to Dave Collins. That'll be interesting when they get together on the field. We'll see how that goes. But no, I agree, Dave. This was a hire. I love his first response to me when I said, why Hodgson? Why did you want the head coaching job at Hodgson in addition to your duties? And he said, I bleed maroon and silver. I went to preschool here. I went to high school here. I've coached for 20 years here. And we've won 4 state championships. I take a lot of pride in that. I think he is just, it's funny. He's been around a long time, but you can feel the enthusiasm for the head coaching job here now. It's like, okay, this is my baby. I just got handed the keys. Let's go. And I know a lot of the coaches are coming back, the Hodgson coaches, and
Mhm.
the guys who have experienced a lot of success with Frank Moffat over the years. And I love that one of the things he says about the first priorities is to continue to build on the culture and foundation, because there has been a good one there.
Yeah.
And he's been, because he's the athletic director, he's been able to communicate with these kids since, the end of last season, knowing
Mhm.
that he most likely was going to be the guy getting this job. And it just sounds like he's excited to get these kids in position where they can be successful again. And I have no doubt that Hodgson is going to be successful again. They're going through a really weird transition where there'll be a road team for at
Mhm.
least this year,
Yep.
every game,
At
which I
Caravel.
believe they're going to play Caravel,
Yep.
correct? Their home
Yep. All the
games.
away games at Caravel.
So it's, they're refiguring the entire Hodgson campus, the school,
Mhm.
the fields, everything. So which has got to be crazy for him being the athletic director and the football coach, because now he's got to find, for every one of their sports, he's finding places for their teams to play and things
Yep.
like that. So a lot on the plate for Dave. Again, he does great work with the DIAA, with the realignment, and this just, again, a no-brainer hire, and I just feel like he's going to be successful there. I don't even have a doubt about it.
Yeah, they were 2019 state champs the season before COVID, and then since then they've only won 8 games. They have had some injury issues. They've had some injury issues. Their star running back got hurt, I think, in the first game, either last year or the year before, missed the season. Their starting receiver had to be the quarterback at some point. It's just one of those things where people were playing out of position, and they had a young offensive line, which is the worst position to have young
Yep.
people. And so, they just, again, somebody who I had a conversation with and said, John, we're going to win 3 or 4 games this year. That's just the reality of things. And it turned out to be that way. This year, they start out, their first 2 games are against 2 Class 2 teams, one district rival, Howard, and the other one is Caravel. And I don't know whether that Caravel game's a home or away game. It's not going to matter because it's going to
It
be
is
at
an away
Caravel
game.
Academy. Either way, it
Yep.
is an away game. So but they'd be there anyway. It's going to be like a home stadium for them.
Yep.
But
Yeah, you're right.
and for those of people downstate that aren't familiar, Caravel Academy is about 2 miles away from Hodson. So if you're going to play in a different stadium, I know there was some talk about them playing down at St. George's at one point, in your district type of
Yep.
thing. And I thought, there's going to be some fans that it's not a big trip, but it's over the canal, which we all know in Delaware. If you're going over the canal, you might as well be going to Chicago in some people's minds. So I like that they're playing the games at Caravel rather than
Yes.
rather than at a district rival school. Let me put it that way. But hey, if they start out 2-0 for this Hodson program, that's huge. I don't care
I
who it's
wrote down the
against.
same thing.
I don't care who it's against.
Yep,
It's
I agree.
huge. So,
because I think they have to experience that success early.
right.
For some of these kids that have been there in the last couple of years have been kind of rough. Yeah, I agree. If they can get off to a good start, and again, we don't know what we're going to get with Howard. Caravel lost some key pieces.
Mhm.
So yeah, this is an opportunity for Dave. Again, I think he's going to be successful. Hopefully for him, it starts this year, but there's an opportunity there to get off to a solid start, and that would be just phenomenal for these kids.
I know he's excited. He can't wait. His son actually is going to be a freshman in the program, so he's excited about that.
Oh, nice.
So eventually, hopefully he'll be coaching his own son at the varsity level. So that's a really neat thing. Okay, so those are the 2 gimmies in Class 3. We knew Frank Moffat was retiring. And we knew Dan Candelora was most likely going to retire as well. Still the head tennis coach, Dan Candelora, by the way, and a very successful one at that down there. So, but the one we weren't expecting was Bill DiNardo resigning, and I'm using air quotes because anybody who knows anything about this situation, I think Bill has even admitted that it was not his choice. I forget who he admitted it to, but it was clearly not his choice to not come back.
And he never said he was retiring. Which was a key
right
there too.
Right off the bat, before he finally admitted it wasn't his choice, he basically, you didn't have to read into it to realize that it was not his choice.
Right.
19 years, 157 wins at Sally's, 4 state championships, the last one in 2013. And again, you can try to figure out why they decided all of a sudden this icon, and that's a proper term when you're talking about Bill DiNardo. You think about Delaware high school football, Butch Simpson, Bill DiNardo, and a couple other people, but he's right up there in that class. And so he's second in wins all time, only to Bob Tattersall. Bill's got 305, and Bob has 331. And he's got also has 3 Division II titles at Middletown, where he coached before he came to Sally. He's also coached at Caravel 1 year. So you're talking about a guy who's got 7 state championships. New guy, Gene Deladon, played at Sally's, was the offensive coordinator last year, was, I believe, a volunteer assistant the year before. Do I have
think
that right?
so.
Yeah. So
Yep.
he hasn't been on staff a long time, like Jeff Allen at Mount Pleasant, but he has been on staff. He was the quarterback. In 2022, they were as young as they've ever been. And a lot of people didn't realize that. They had 4 freshman starters,
Yep.
including a quarterback,
Yes.
Ryan Stower, who's only the second ever quarterback to start as a freshman. The first was Gene Deladon. And so they have that in common. Deladon went on to play at Duke and Middle Tennessee State. And one of his goals, he's made it clear, is to modernize this offense for Sally's.
Yep. And I think, Bill DiNardo, you can't argue with the success. And one of the things I've always said over the years was, you look at Sally's basketball teams and the athleticism, and you look at the football team and you see that same athleticism, but I don't know that it was always utilized. Let's face it, Bill was an old school coach who loved to run the ball. It was like, when you pass two or three things can happen, 2 of 3 things can happen, and the 2 are bad. So I think with Gene, one of the things, first of all, he and his family have been involved with Sally's for a long time. I mean, he says Sally's is everything. After my family, it's the single most important thing in my life. He said over the last couple of years, he's had a great opportunity to build relationships with these kids. Gene also owns a training facility called the Grail, which is not far from my house. So he sees a lot of these kids, I'm sure, in the off season, kids that work out. I know Gene is not an everyday guy there. I'm not trying to get him in any kind of trouble, but Gene has experienced success at the next level. He got a scholarship to Duke, competed for the starting quarterback job there, transferred and changed positions to a tight end. Put on the required weight and played 3 years for Middle Tennessee as a tight end. I think what we started to see last year was with the starting freshman quarterback, and they had a starting wide receiver who was a freshman, who's really good. It's a young team, but I feel like Gene is that new school guy. And let's face it, a lot of old school Sally's fans are going to have they're going to have the microscope on Gene this season, because they're going to expect the same success as Bill. I'm excited to see what Gene can do here. Just talking to him a number of times over the past several months, I mean, he's extremely excited about this job. He's got a great staff in place, including, I think Paul Warlow, I tweeted, who was, had a great NFL career, Concord graduate, University of Delaware graduate, is going to coach their defensive line, I believe, or be their defensive coordinator. So these guys are really going to hit the ground running. And I think with the quarterback, Ryan Storer, if you look at his Twitter account, he goes to all these camps over the summer, and the kid's getting bigger, his arm's getting stronger. I think this Sally's team is going to have a chance to be very successful, but Gene's a young guy. For the long term, he lives here, and of course, everybody, if there's anybody out there who doesn't know, he's Elena Deladon's brother. So the rich history of athletics in that family. I think they're gonna do well, but I think the biggest change is going to be they're going to put these athletes in positions to be successful. Whereas before they might have been used as decoys or used as this, that, or the other. Gene's going to get these kids the ball. He's going to spread the ball around. It might not be like a Mike Judy type offense, but Gene knows what he's doing. And just, again, the enthusiasm coming from him. And it's funny, because I looked at the schedule and their first game, which we'll talk about later, it's DMA, and it's one of those. Boy, the microscope will be on him for this game, because the people are going to be expecting probably a rout,
and it's a Super Bowl for DMA. It's their biggest game of the year.
There's not a lot to win there for Salesianum. You're supposed to win the game, and if you lose, holy smokes! So interesting first game for them, but I really think that Gene is going to bring a new style to this team. Again, it may take some time, because this Bill DiNardo has had this program in place a long time, and the kids who have been there 2-3 years now know nothing but that. So it's going to be very interesting to see if he can transition this into the type of offense he wants and how fast he can do it. But again, much the same way with some of the other coaches we talked about, I think Gene's going to be extremely successful at Sally's.
And so a couple notes. I think by making this coaching move, I wonder if you've prevented some kids who are 7th and 8th graders from choosing another school, not knowing if Coach Bill DiNardo is going to be there the entire 4 years. It's kind of like the old college thing.
Oh, yeah.
Are you going to go to a school knowing that coach is kind of, are you going to go to Duke 3 years ago knowing Mike Krzyzewski is 78, whatever he is,
right,
and may not be there all 4 years? And it's a compliment to Bill DiNardo. I say that as a compliment, that you care enough about that coach and who you're going to be playing for, that you're nervous that if you go in and he takes you under his wing. I'd be nervous as a father sending my kid there. And then all of a sudden, your junior year, Bill retires, Gene comes in and starts this whole new offense. And my kid was built around the other offense, and so what that happened. So I think that's one way to look at it. And I'm not saying anybody at Sally's was thinking about that necessarily when they made this decision, but I think that is just a realistic outcome of it. Is you may now have prevented, but then the other thing also is the flip side is that, are there going to be anybody that transfers out because of this change? That's the other side too. And again, we're not going to speculate and talk about it, but that's one of the immediate things that I thought about with that. You mentioned the DMA thing. Credit, and I will always credit Bill DiNardo and John Wilson the last 2 years, only Class 3 schools that played all the other Class 3 schools when you could in a 10-game schedule, which anybody that's listening to the show knows I was all for and thought everybody should have been doing that. Now it's impossible because there's 12 teams in the class, so you can't play all of them. They've now gone back to playing 2 out-of-state teams, Bonner and Prendergast. And, of course, Sally's was famous for playing those powerhouses from out of state, and part of that was because they couldn't get anybody on their schedule in state who wanted to play them, knowing it was going to be an automatic loss in a lot of cases. So they're back to that. But they've got the week 1 against DMA, which will be DMA Super Bowl. And as you said, Gene Deladon's first biggest game of his career, first career game as a head coach. And then week 10, they've got the St. Mark's game, the rivalry, air quotes, similar to the Del State University of Delaware rivalry. Will be interesting to see if that actually
It'd be great to see what the
return.
stakes are when that game rolls around for each of those teams.
Is it in winning you're in and losing you're out?
Yes.
So that will be interesting for sure. If nothing else, that will be it. So anyway, so Sally's was the shocker, because of Bill DiNardo, an icon in Delaware high school football, in Delaware high school sports, period. And we wish him nothing but the best. That's obviously he's not going to coach here in Delaware next year because all the jobs are taken. But it will be interesting to see, as he mentioned in his very first interview after he was no longer the head coach at Sally's, was that he didn't think he was finished coaching. And so it will be interesting to see where he lands. All right. So the last thing we wanted to do was to each pick who we think are going to be the 2 most successful coaches this coming year out of this group of 12 new head coaches, and a surprisingly successful one, and then who is going to have the most challenging schedule. Marty, I'm going to give you my first most successful, and then you can pick yours, and then I'll give you my second. I think McCain's got a good shot at being successful. 4 wins last year, granted some of them with AI, but I looked at their roster. They've got a lot of returning people, and they made the move down to 1A. I think if you look at their schedule, 5 wins is very doable, with an opportunity to win 6, maybe even 7 games, depending on the rosters, what comes out about that. So I think McCain has a very legitimate shot to have a very successul season under their first-year head coach.
Well, I only have one because McCain was my other one.
Okay.
But I think
clearly we don't communicate ahead of time.
That's
People
right.
know that. But, and we like
that's
to,
good.
we like
We try
this.
to surprise.
We
That's
try
right.
to surprise
That's
each other, right?
Brendan Ireton at Tatnall, I think, has a great chance. Again, that their first game of the season is against a friend school that no longer has Robbie Tattersall, who accounted for about 99% of the offense last year, including all the kicking duties. After that, St. Andrews, Glasgow, Dickinson, McCain, Tower Hill, AI. I think they have a shot at possibly 6 wins for the season, which would be great for Tatnall. It certainly would be enough to get them back into the playoffs again. So I think, Brendan, that with the way the schedule is set up, and I looked at some of the briefly while we were talking, some of the returning players, I think they got a chance to be successful right off the bat. So Tatnall's going to be my chance for the most successful.
All right. My other one was Sally's. And here's why. You got a freshman quarterback who's got a full year of experience coming back, playing for a quarterback's coach, basically, in Gene Deladon. They're going to open up the offense, which is only going to make them, I think, even more successful because they're Sally's is loaded with athletes. I think sometimes when people think of Sally's, they think, okay, they're good swimmers, they're good cross-country runners, Well, I was down at the track meet, the state track meet yesterday. They got the fastest guys in the state are down there, and they're of all different builds and backgrounds. And, they've got athletes. Their basketball team's loaded with athletes. Their baseball team, they're all loaded with athletes.
And I think Gene may be able to convince some of those kids,
yeah,
maybe not a ton, but a few of them to come out to the football field
right,
and put them to use and put them in a position to be
yeah,
successful.
yep. There might be some wide receivers who play baseball and or lacrosse that knew they were never going to touch a ball in a non-throwing offense, and now that's going to be a different thing. So I think they have an opportunity to be successful. And again, what's successful at Sally's, they'll tell you anything shy of a state championship's not successful. I think getting back to the playoffs and deep into the playoffs would not back, but getting deeper into the playoffs. And again, they haven't won a state championship in what will now be 10 years this fall. So, and that's always the goal for there. All right, I'll let you go first for surprisingly successful. And I know how I defined successful in my team, and I'll let you decide how you did in yours as well.
I think, well, I thought about Hodgson for different reasons, but I'm going to go with Jed Bell at Milford. And I think it's because they got a good number of kids. They average, I think it's between like 35, 40 kids, somewhere in that neighborhood. They got a schedule that's set up pretty good to start the season. They got Mount Pleasant, again, William Penn. You never know what you're going to get at this point. Del Castle, Concord. And I think Jed having the experience, he was extremely successful at Woodbridge. I think he's going to be able to get these kids in the system, work over the summer. As the AD, he's in the building, so he's able to spend time with these kids, work with these kids. And I just think, I feel like somewhere along the line they're going to bust out this season and maybe get 6. I think again 6 wins would be great for Milford. They still got some very tough games at the end of the schedule, but I think Jed has a chance to surprise.
All right, I went with 2 programs that are in very similar situations, and that's Caesar Rodney and Hodson. I'm going to use the term new blood.
Alike. Yep.
New blood, which I used talking about it. And it's no disrespect to either Dan Candelora or Frank Moffitt at all. It's just the reality when you have somebody that's been doing it for as many years as they were doing it. Because remember, Dan Candelora, he was only the head coach of Caesar Rodney for 8 years. He's been an assistant there for his entire career, of 25 plus years, I think. So the fresh blood, well, not new blood, fresh blood in those situations. Both teams have high roster numbers each year. Both teams are loaded with athletes each year. Absolutely. And so those are 3 positive things to me. Fresh blood, lots of athletes, lots of players, lots of bodies. They play each other in week 5, so that'll be interesting. I like Hodson's opportunity to start out 2-0, as I mentioned already. And when I looked at Caesar Rodney's schedule, I just pulled that up as well. They start off with William Penn, which I think is a winnable game. Those 2 teams, I think, played close games the last 2 years. And are in similar situations. And then they play Class 2 Lake Forest and Class 2 Laurel. Now, Class 2 Laurel is a very tough game, and Lake might be too. But I think both these programs have an opportunity for the 3 reasons I mentioned, the new blood, the lots of bodies and athletic bodies. But I also think they have an opportunity to go certainly 1-0, if not 2-0, which I think will make a huge difference in the motivation and the excitement of football returning to both of those places the way it was 4, 5, 6 years ago. It's not like these teams have been, bad for 20 years. That's not the case at all. Hodson State Championship in 2019. Caesar Rodney, it's been a while. 2008 was their last state championship, but they were a playoff team right before COVID. So that's my 2 surprisingly successful ones. So, all right. So most challenging schedule. We probably agree on this one.
I know what you're going with. So you go ahead. I found a different one. Yeah.
All right. I'm going with DMA. At Sally's could be a loss. At Del Mar could be a loss. At Sussex Central could be a loss. And if you notice, those are all 3 away games. And so while Del Mar could be, it's a Class 2 versus a Class 2, that's a tough place to play. It's a long bus ride on a Friday night. They bleed football down at Del Mar as much as anywhere in the state of Delaware. And so those are 3 incredibly difficult games. And then they play Elkton. I don't know a lot about Elkton, and it's hard to say.
They were a playoff team last year, but the Maryland works so much differently.
And would they be would they be class 3 here or class 2? I don't know the answer to that question. And then they play Archmere. So let's say even if Elkton's a win, you could be 1-4 to start your season. Then you got Red Lion.
I was going to say Red Lion at Red Lion.
That could be a loss. Concord, that could be a winnable game. Newark could be winnable. Caravel, we'll see how Caravel is. If it's Caravel from last year, that's going to be a tough game. And then Del Castle winnable. So that's I define challenging as, that would be challenging for any veteran coach, let alone a rookie coach who's trying to motivate his players into his system and what we're trying to do. And you can tell me all you want about, well, we lost the game, but it might be a good loss. There's never a good loss. I forget, there's never a good loss, especially when you're trying to build a program or build on a program, which is what they're not rebuilding. I think they're trying to refurbish, maybe is the term, of what they were a couple years ago before Nick Lincoln came in and changed that whole program in not good ways, as anybody would admit. So they're trying to refurbish that football program to what it was maybe 2 years ago, in every aspect, not just in the wins and losses column. So my most challenging schedule is Delaware Military Academy.
And mine, kind of using the same criteria that you did as to what means challenging. A new coach coming in and trying to get things going very quickly. Glasgow, Ricky Brown for me is just the first 3 games are Sussex Tech. So 3A, Red Lion, Woodbridge, both 2A programs. Then they have 3 playoff teams, Tatnall, St. Elizabeth, and Charter. This is a killer schedule. The first winnable game that comes up on the schedule is not until October 14th against Christiana. They end with Christiana, AI DuPont, Dickinson, and McCain. They're going to take their lumps early on in the season. I'm sure Coach Brown knows that, and he's going to prepare his players to, again, I think success for them is going to be competing in these games and trying to keep them within a reasonable amount. Because I don't think it's out of line saying that most of these are probably going to be routes to start the season, just because a new coach coming in with a new system, a roster that was depleted a bit last year, and a schedule that's just like not friendly at all right off the bat. So yeah, Glasgow, I think, and I agree 100% about DMA. You and I have talked about that schedule before. The Sally's game was on, then it was off, then it was on again. So I think a lot of people are like, wow, they're starting the season with Sally. So yeah, Glasgow and DMA, definitely the 2 most challenging schedules for these 2 new head coaches.
And one clarification, you mentioned Sussex Tech as a class 3 school. They're a class 2 school.
Sorry about that.
Still a very tough. That's still a very tough. It doesn't
you know what I'm thinking? The old, when they were Division 1 before we went to realignment.
Yep, exactly. So anyway, all right. So that's a look at all the new coaches. A little bit longer than we usually do our podcast, but hopefully you enjoyed it. We enjoyed doing the research for it and chatting about it. It's going to be interesting to see how it all goes. 2 more things for you. I want to give the DFRC Blue Gold game a plug. A great game, a Delaware tradition like none other. Even though a lot of the future Division I football players are opting not to play in that game, and you can understand, we kind of saw that coming. Yep. These schools who have already given these kids these scholarships who are going there, as freshmen, they don't care about the Delaware tradition. They want their kid there healthy. Yes. They want their kid healthy when they report to camp. So there's a guy, we're not going to get into who is and isn't playing in that right now, but that's just the reality of it. It's Friday, June 16th at the University of Delaware. Kickoff's at 7. The opening ceremony's at 6. This is a game. I hope you're tuning in on radio. If you can't make it, Bill Harmon and I will be on the call on Fox Sports 1290. But let me tell you, if you can get there, you got to get there and see the opening ceremony when they parade in with the buddies and the whole buddy program and all that. I'll never do it justice on the radio describing it. And so you need to try to come and see that. Of course, it supports a great cause, DFRC, which provides grant money to organizations who do things to benefit people with intellectual disabilities. The blue coach is Jody Russell from Newark. The gold coach is Brian Timpson from Appoquinimink. So it should be just another great night and a great tradition. Tickets are anywhere from $10 to $20, depending on where you want to sit. And so dfrc.org is where you can get those tickets. They're up for sale already. So just a great tradition for that. All right. Speaking of traditions, Marty and I are going to start a new one at the end of the show. And we're going to call this segment One Final Thought. It can be any thought we have about anything. And I'll start with my new favorite college football coach is Steve Sarkisian. And this happened about a month ago. But so it's old news. If you follow college football, you heard it. But if not, he's the first guy that I know of who has basically said if you play football for the University of Texas and you put your name into the portal, you have played your last game for the University of Texas. We wish you well, but you're either all in to be a Longhorn or you're not. You're in the portal. And if you're in the portal and things don't work out for you, we're sorry, but you're still not coming back to play football for the University of Texas. And I love that. I love that.
I do too.
I don't like the portal. I don't like all that. But you know what? Here's my thought. And I've put one kid through college. He didn't play sports. I got 2 more kids coming up. If you're not happy in college, I want you to leave and I want you to go somewhere else. But these kids aren't doing it in a lot of cases for this reason. They're doing it to get name, image, and likeness money, which is the biggest thing. And while that's not going away, they got to get that under control, Marty, or this is going to be, it's going to be a disaster. And so, but anyway, let's not get too far into that. But I like the fact that you're either all in playing for the University of Texas or you're not. And if you're putting your name in that transfer portal to go play football somewhere else for whatever reason, if you're not happy, that's fine too.
Right.
But you're not going to be any happier if you come out of that portal and come back to the University of Texas, obviously, if you've bothered to put your name in that. So hats off to Steve Sarkisian. I hope Texas wins the national championship for the next 5 years in a row.
I love it too, because I love in the one of the interviews where he talked about it, he asked the reporter, he said, can you imagine tomorrow going into your boss and saying, hey, I really like my job here, but just so you know, I'm going to go on a bunch of interviews over the next 2 weeks and I want to see if I can get something better. But if I can't, don't worry, I'll be here.
But I'm all in if I come back.
That's it.
I even
love because now kids have started releasing statements, and at the end of the statement where they say, thank you, I loved all this, they say, well, this may not be the end of the road. And you're like, what? It makes no sense. So he was the first coach to publicly come out and say, no, we're not doing this.
Here's how it is.
Mine is, and this is cool. The Wilmington University softball team is going to the Division II Women's College World Series for the first time ever. And I've been following this team all year. My cousin Delaney Sheehan is the number 2 pitcher on the Wilmington roster. They are a phenomenal team. They're a lot of fun. Coach Mike Sheehan does a phenomenal job there every year. They have, just to name a few, Kylie Gunkel is the star pitcher. She is incredible. She's basically pitched, I'd say, probably 60% of the games. Lexi Moore, their shortstop, was the CACC Player of the Year. My favorite player, and I always put this on Twitter, Taylor Gillis, is the center fielder. She's the leadoff hitter. She is blazing fast, and I feel like she's one of those kids that the nation's going to find out about come Thursday when they open play at 1:30 in the afternoon against Grand Valley State. But Sarah Miller is their home run hitter. They can do a ton of different things. Mike Sheehan, I told you, one thing he does drives me crazy, you don't mind saying, is he bunts all the time. Like the Moneyball guy in me says, oh my God, why are we giving up all these outs? But holy smokes, you cannot argue with his success. The guy
I was going to say, his question to you, Marty, would be, when's the last time you coached the team?
I was just going to say, yeah, I sit here at home saying, I turn to my mom and I say, oh my God, why are they bunting here? And then 3 runs later, I'm like, oh, okay. They are a fun team to watch. They are really connected as a team. They all seem to get along, and it just seems like the perfect storm. And they also got seeded 4th of the 8 teams. So the respect for Wilmington at the national level is huge. Yeah. And, Dan Loletta has done a great job publicizing this team. They hosted the regional, Wilmington did, and Dan Loletta and his team did an incredible job along with 302 Sports in presenting the tournament. It was a fantastic viewing experience. So I hope whoever's televising, I'm guessing it'll be streamed until the later rounds when they hit ESPN, that's a good show to watch. But Wilmington starts the College World Series Thursday at 1:30 against Grand Valley State, and I can't wait.
All right, those are our final thoughts. We hope you enjoyed this kind of 3 months out from the Delaware High School football season. As we mentioned, if we think there's stuff to talk about, we'll be back on before the preseason. If not, we'll certainly keep you updated on our Facebook and Twitter accounts as to where you can get, or as to when we will be coming back on the air. So hope you've enjoyed it. Usually we sign off by saying, have a great sports week. It's going to be longer than that, but hey, you know what it is? Other than track and field, which held its state championship yesterday, all the other playoffs are getting ready to start. So It's a great time for high school sports. A lot of them you can see on live streams if you can't make it out. So, pick a team, follow them along, and just enjoy it, because there's nothing better than high school sports. Until we talk again, thanks for tuning in.